All right, here we go. So welcome to another IFSCA Live. Today we're going to talk about the 6Fs, which I'm calling, the most essential IFS map. We have many maps in IFS. This is one of them, but it's one that helps us go from what would sound like talk therapy. The client just comes in and starts talking to us, to we go into their system and we get to know a part and we develop a relationship with it. So the 6Fs, as most people know, Dick loves alliteration. So this is a little bit forceful because they're not all Fs. One of them is befriending, but there's an F in the middle. So it's called the 6Fs. But basically it is going from, here is the client talking about what happened during the week or bringing an issue to talk about, and us being able to find a part to work on, inviting the client to focus, checking if we have permission to do that, getting a clearer sense of how the client is connected to that part, checking if the client is directly connected to the part or if other parts are filtering or blocking the way to that part, and then starting to develop a relationship with that part, hearing how it helps the system, and then being able to move from protector with a concern and a fear to the part that it protects, which is an exile, right? And then that's a whole different map, working with the exile. So these 6Fs there, it's a map for working with protectors. So the first F is find. The classic way that we do this is, as a client speaks, we take notes, and then at some point we say, client, is it okay if I reflect some of the parts that I'm hearing? This is, of course, if we've worked with the client and we've already introduced IFS work and they know what to expect. If they don't know what to expect, then we'll need to do a little bit more introduction and say something like, in IFS, we work with the different parts of us that might have different ideas about what we should do. And it sounds like you have a part that feels like this and a part that feels like that. Is that tracking onto your experience? Yes. Okay. So we could get to know these parts. Would you like to do that? Now, if we already have a contract that we're going to be using in IFS, we can just say, is it okay if I reflect some of these parts? So that's the most classical way of doing it. But that's not the only way that we go into a person's system. This finding parts, it doesn't necessarily need to be through language. It could be that the client comes into the session and just says, there's this feeling in my gut. It's been bothering me all week, right? So already we have a part, we've found a part. And so we might, now that we have done step number one, we've found a part, we might move into step number two. Is it okay to focus on that? For some clients, though, they come and they talk, and it might be a little bit hard for them to really understand that what they're talking about are different parts of them. So with these clients, we might have to do a little bit more implicit direct access or a little bit more psychoeducation. So, when it sounds like you're describing a specific way that you're feeling in those situations. And it seems like one of the ways that you're feeling is like you're angry when this happens, and then you do something about it, you express the anger, and then you feel some shame. Is that right? Okay, great. So we could get to know the anger and the shame a little bit better. We could get to know these as parts of you. Would you like to do that? So finding is actually a very important step, and it might be as quick as the client names a part and we go into it, or it might be a whole session, just like mapping parts out and listening to them. Especially clients that have lots of trauma, we might actually just be like mapping all of the parts that are involved and seeing which one brings the other, and putting that on a piece of paper or mapping it some other way. So all of this fits into finding parts. Once we've found one part, usually a number of parts, it's usually a good idea to focus on one. So we can do that in a number of different ways. If there's one that feels like it's clearly the one that's wanting attention, the client might say like, this is what I want to focus on. But if that's not the case, we could ask and say, client, as I reflect these parts back, do you have a sense that there's one of them that might want your attention? Or do you have a sense of where your system is wanting to focus today? So that's an invitation to find one of these to focus on. And then once we have that, we also want to make sure that we have permission, right? So we might ask, is it okay to focus on that part? At this point, we might get, no, it's not okay. Not okay to focus, which means we have another part with a concern about focusing on that one, and then we will have to address that. If you have questions about how to address concerns, we did a live on that a little while ago, so you can search for the other lives that we've recorded. So you would address that concern and then come back, but if you have no concerns, then great, you found the part, you made the invitation to focus on one of them, and you know which one you want to focus on, and you have permission to do that. The next step is, let's really help the client get clear how they're connecting with that part, how it's showing up for them, so that when we ask questions about the part or about the relationship with the part, it's easy for the client to answer that. We're just making it easier for them to know what we're talking about. And that's the step of fleshing out, which is bringing clarity to this relationship, but also going deeper for the client. So fleshing out could be as simple as, where is that part in or around your body? So that's one way. But it could be giving a menu and saying, client, are you feeling that part in your body? Do you have a sense of where it is spatially? Can you see the part? Can you hear the part? How is it communicating with you in other ways? So giving that menu sometimes helps clients that don't have a lot of clarity or don't even know what we're asking for, to get clearer on how the part is showing up. And we could really spend a long time. We could really slow down with this and say, okay, so you have a sense that this part is in your chest. Is it like just a little dot, or is it like a big area? Okay, it's a big area. Does it feel like it's like pressuring your chest, or is it like squeezing, or is it vibrating, or is it pushing down or pushing up? So we can really slow down. And all of these questions, they should be questions that are not intellectual questions, like what do you think, but more like, what are you feeling and noticing in this present moment? And that's something that's important to be said. IFS work is done in the present moment. Right, so these questions are questions that invite U-turn. So we are turning inwards more and more and more and going deeper and deeper. So these questions, that's one of the reasons why we don't usually do like meditations or do other things to help the client get into a deeper state, because IFS questions in and of themselves, they help the client naturally deepen into their system. Once we have clarity around, these are the parts, this is the one we want to focus on, it's okay to focus on that part, and this is how it's showing up, then we want to see, is this connection between self and part a clear, direct connection, or are there other parts that are blocking or filtering? And that's when we ask the question, how do you feel towards this part? And at this point, you might get, I don't like it, or I want to get rid of it, some type of part with an agenda. Then you would have to address that concern until that part gets to soften and you can stay with this. And then ideally, at some point, you will get to, oh, I feel compassion, or I feel open and curious. which is one of the C's, one of the qualities of self energy. And then once you get that, then you begin to develop a relationship with the part by saying to the part, hey, this is how I'm feeling towards you. Can you take some of this in? Right. And so that's the beginning of the befriending step, which is the fifth one. So befriending is offering self energy, noticing how the part responds, seeing how self responds to the part responding that way or sharing that information, and doing this back and forth between self and part. So this is developing a relationship. But besides developing the relationship, at some point we might also ask informational questions. How long have you been feeling this way? What was happening back then? Et cetera, et cetera. What's your job? How do you help the system? And so all of these questions will be questions that will give us information about what happened back then, what type of conclusions this part came to, what its role is, and other information that tell us whether, like, how much this part is frozen in the past, aware of the present, aware of the client and who the client is, etc. And so under this umbrella of befriending, we might also do a little bit of updating and orienting, although updating and orienting could come earlier, could come later, but it usually fits here. And then once we have enough information and we've developed a good relationship with that part, it's time for us to move from talking to the protector to helping the exile that it protects. And the way we do that is by going to the last step, which is fears. And in this step, we want to ask, what are you afraid would happen if you didn't do your job anymore? What are you afraid would happen if you were not angry in this way anymore? If you did not block in this way anymore? And what we are fishing for is information about who the exile is or who the exiles are. So oftentimes we can also just more directly ask, who do you protect? And sometimes to help with this transition from I'm the protector and I have to do this job to maybe someone else could help me, maybe we could do something different. To help with that transition, it's often good for the protector if they can envision a different future. And the way that we invite them to envision the different future is we ask a couple of hypothetical questions. One of them is, if you didn't have to do this job anymore and you could do anything else, would you like that? Would you like to be able to take a break, even if it's a short break? Would you like that? Yes. Okay, great. If it's a yes, then if you didn't have to do this anymore, didn't have to do this as much anymore, what would you like to do instead? Right. So this is helping the protector understand that there is something different that's possible, and even think about like, oh, what would I like to do? So it's like, but connecting back to their essence and to what they really want for themselves. Once we get that clear who the exile is and they get to envision that it could be different, we ask the question, if we could go and heal that exile, would you like that? Can we go do that right now? Yes. And then we say, hey, thank you. Exile, is it okay if we talk to you now? And then we shift to working with the exile. So these are the 6 F's: find, focus, flesh out, feel towards, befriend, and fears. Great. Will it always happen like this with clients? You go linearly through them? No. Some sessions, they are all about just finding. That's all you're going to do in that session. You're going to be mapping parts, finding parts, and you don't really move to step number 2. Some other sessions, you're doing great, and it's like 1, 2, 3, 4. You get to feel towards, goes smoothly, easily, and then you get to feel towards, and then you have a bunch of parts with concerns here. Or you might get to the fears, and something gets a little stuck here. And sometimes a part comes up, and you need to shift the focus to another part and do the F's with that other part, and then another part comes up, and you need to shift the focus to another part. So it's actually more complex sometimes. And for clients, so for some clients, especially if there's a lot of trauma, you might not actually be able to go through the F's like that because they cannot do insight very well. Then you will need something else altogether, which is a different map of how to help them build that capacity, be able to go inside and feel safe going inside. So if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat. It could be comments about this thing that we're talking about, the 6 F's, or you could also have questions about the work that you're doing with your clients. Feel free to post them in the chat and have a conversation with me now. So this is the process, right? The 6 F's. Even when I'm not actually doing insight, I might actually still have the 6 F's in the back of my head. So an example of this would be like, let's say I'm working with a client and I'm using implicit direct access. So the client doesn't really feel safe going inside. So it's not okay for me to say, hey, turn towards this part and ask it this and talk to the part in that way. But I might still be listening to the client, hearing the things that the client is saying. I might still say, okay, so it sounds like there's this way that you're feeling and that way that you're feeling in this part and that part. And then I might say, ask questions about like, what does it usually feel like when this part is up? What does it usually feel like when that part is up? What's your sense of how this part is helping you? What's your hypothesis here? So we are working in a different way, and we're keeping it a little bit more intellectual, but we are still using the map and moving through the map and getting to know the client in that way, and eventually making it easy, safer and easier to go inside of their system. Okay, Donna says, hey, so I think I posted a question in the email a while ago, but if you don't have it, I will ask a new one. Oh, I don't have access to, I haven't opened my questions for today, Donna, so if you want to ask a new one, feel free to do that. Let me see if there's anything else about the 6 F's. Also, there's something to be said about the way that we hold a map. A map is only as useful as like a loose framework. If we make the map the top priority and we try to follow the map at all costs and we forget that we have a client that's a human being in front of us, then it's not going to really be all that helpful. And also, you will find that sometimes you have intuition, and the intuition that you should actually go in a different direction than what we usually teach. An example of this is I prefer to usually go find, focus, flesh out, feel towards. And then when I'm going into the befriending, really focus on the relationship first rather than asking informational questions. But for some clients, especially if they have attachment wounds that make it hard for them to be in relation to themselves, asking relational questions at that point might be harder for them than just asking informational questions. So with asking more informations might help the client flesh out the part even more. And then once more information comes, compassion comes, and then it's clearer for them what the relationship with the part is. And so it's easier for them to answer the how do you feel towards, is the part aware of you, does the part like being there with you, etc., etc. Donna says, I have a new person who has an addiction to porn. I am curious about IFS and sex addiction. I thought that it would be simply done as parts work, but some are saying that they need a certified expert. So this question is more about scope of practice, I think. So does the person need a certified expert? Not necessarily. It really depends on what it is. Most people have some sort of addiction, really. Most people. It's very rare that you have clients that don't have some type of addiction. And these addictions, they are at different levels. And they are creating different degrees of problem in their lives. So the question is, as you're working with this client and you're using the IFS model, do you have a sense that it's bringing clarity to the client, that the client is taking steps forward? Do you feel like the amount of experience and expertise that you have is helping the client in their process? Because if it is, then it could be that they don't necessarily need a specific expert. Also, I mean, some people they're like, okay, great, there's like a certified sex addiction expert, but they don't have IFS, so not I wouldn't know like which one would do better. The certified sex expert who doesn't have IFS, or someone who's really great at IFS, has worked with clients with other addictions, and now this one is sex addiction. So it's a complex thing to answer. My safest way to know whether I'm working within the scope of practice is to just have a supervisor and have that supervisor help me get clear around, like, do I really have what it takes to be with this client? So Don is saying, agreed, we are just at the intake part, and there is a strong therapeutic connection so far. Great. So one thing you probably want to do, Donna, is say to the client, look, this is the amount of experience I have working with addictions in general. This is the amount of experience I have working with sex addiction, and this is what I have to offer. These are my qualifications. And I want to be very clear with you about them. How does that land for you? Does it feel like I am the right person for you to be working on this issue with? And then you see what the client says. And then at some point, if you feel like, okay, really, I'm getting a sense that this client needs something that I don't have, then it's time to offer a referral, right? So the question you're asking is really scope of practice. And yeah, I mean, sex addiction really is oftentimes just a chronic firefighter, but it's also indicative of trauma, right? And so I don't know how much experience you have working with trauma. That's something that you also have to be mindful of. And working with addictions also requires a lot of skill in working with polarizations, right? Because oftentimes you have the firefighters that are doing something, and then you have the managers that don't like what they're doing. And unless you know how to work with that polarization, then it's not going to be an easy process for you and the client. Okay, so Don is saying lots of experience with trauma. Yeah. Okay, so I hope that answer helps you get a little bit clearer on how to proceed and think about this. Any other questions or comments, either about the 6 Fs or about any of the clients that you have right now? And Donna saying thank you. No, thank you for the questions, Donna, and for always participating here. And I'd like to give a little bit of time because I know that typing takes a little while, and then it might take a while for it to come, but it seems like that's it for today. So if there are no more questions, I want to thank you for joining us one more time. I'm starting to rethink how we do this thing, and if anyone has suggestions about how to make these lives more entertaining or more helpful or more useful, please let me know. Send me an email to gustavo.alps@gmail.com. If you have any questions, feel free to send them to my email as well. And then please send me the email. Just remind me again what the other question is that you asked that I haven't answered yet, and I will get to that next time. Thank you all for being here, and I will see you next time.